Hey guys, welcome to book review 31, Sparring with Charlie, a motorcycle, Sparring with Charlie, Motorbiking Down the Ho Chi Minh Trail by Christopher Hunt. So as the book implies, this is a motorcycling journey down the length of Vietnam. You know, Vietnam is a very long, thin country. With an attempt to see parts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, though it actually he only gets it in bits and parcels as it goes along. Christopher Hunt, he starts in Hanoi in Vietnam, and kind of without any official documentation or huge planning, this is kind of a fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. He buys a motorcycle, a Russian-made Minsk model motorcycle, which he mentions that he loves throughout the book because it's so it's just got a certain charm to it, a certain Soviet bloc charm, I guess you would say. Visit some people there, not them all of the greatest repute. You know, some ex-Vietnam veterans who have moved back to Vietnam and live in kind of just kind of a mediocre state, or just kind of a state of suspended animation, reliving their past. He visits some government ministries who provide useful information, but are also kind of leery. And one of the things that he does mention is one of the places he goes to is the Apocalypse Now bar, which was actually mentioned in, I think it's They Never Came Home, a book that I did previously, about a huge sort of like meeting spot bar for ex-Vietnam veterans within Vietnam, and it's called Apocalypse Now, named after the movie, I would assume. But anyway, he eventually gets on his way. After meeting a number of intriguing characters within the capital, and heads out of the city. And the first thing he notices when he goes out of the city is just how underdeveloped it is, the countryside of Vietnam. Vietnam has recently engaged in a policy of opening, much like China, and its two main cities of Hanoi and Saigon, or what is now known as Ho Chi Minh City, have increased their commercial capacity greatly, particularly compared to the immediate post-Vietnam War days, when it was very sort of staid and I guess you'd say so, a classic example of socialist poverty. But outside the capital, what he notices is the continuation of poverty. A few towns kind of stand out, like Hue and Dan Trang, primarily resort or having to do with bringing in tourist dollars from kind of people coming back to remember the Vietnam War. But what he really sees is, in most of the real rural areas, true poverty. People not necessarily starving to death or just at the bitter end of life, but just kind of, you know, you raise your rice and that's it. Like, there's nothing to really do in town other than kind of amuse yourself with the very basic things, but no sort of engines of real economic development. One of the things that he kind of mentions in the book that he goes along is how the Vietnamese people are both very welcoming and accommodating, yet at the same time, at times not, which is, I guess, is true of all people. But the thing that kind of stood out to me was the strata between the people that are welcoming and the people that are not. And the people that are not tend to either be in the state apparatus somehow, not high-level people, but just sort of bitter, low-level policemen or highwaymen, or just, enforcers of the communist policy. And then also the people that were kind of a little more, some of them that were a little more closed-minded were people that were psychologically affected by the Vietnam War. These primarily being older people, but people that, really were felt. I should also mention that this book was written in 2006. So a lot of the people that were in the Vietnam War, say in their 20s, would be, I don't know, maybe like in their 50s, whereas now they would be getting substantially older into old age and dying off and that kind of thing. So you kind of got to see Vietnam when it was changing, but still the vast overriding theme was the Vietnam War. Whereas I feel nowadays the Vietnam War is kind of in Vietnam, while certainly at the forefront, there's all these unexploded ordnances that were all over the place that continue to maim and hurt people. It's kind of moving a little bit into our history. I mean, I hate to say this, kind of like World War II or even the Vietnam War is in the United States, as the Iraq War and the Persian Gulf War and the war in Afghanistan are much more immediate. What else do I have to say? Well, I guess he really didn't achieve that much in seeing the Ho Chi Minh Trail, primarily because, as the book is Motorbiking Down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, he didn't actually get to ride down most of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He mostly rode down highways and then saw little pieces and patches of it, primarily because during the Vietnam War, America was bombing any supply routes from the communist north to the capitalist, or whatever you want to call it, democratic, corrupted South, to prevent the other side from gaining advantage. I mean, that's obvious. That's warfare. So what really the Ho Chi Minh Trail had to do was find the most remote kind of mountain passes and regions possible, most of them which have been grown over largely by jungle, and they obviously couldn't use the main highways because those were all just always bombed out all the time and constantly monitored and shelled, and you just couldn't move supplies down them to the south because of their obviousness, which is this is actually what he travels on, because those are the roads nowadays which are actually in good shape. But he does get to see bits and pieces. There's a specific part where what he'll kind of do is Highway 1 runs along the coast, which that really wasn't the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but then what he'll do is he'll cut inland to, let me get the map out, to Khe Gao and Mu Gai Pass, Lo Bao, places like this that were supply routes. And even at one point he cuts into kind of southern Laos, which, if you know anything about the Vietnam War, Laos and Cambodia are right next to Vietnam, and being pretty much empty states as they were at the time, or ignored states until we started bombing them, they were great conduits for having the Vietnamese transport supplies through their territories. Let's see. I guess I've talked a lot about the specifics. He does like sort of some mainstream touristy things too. Like he goes and sees the ancient temples of Hue and the beautiful, comely women of Da Nang. Yeah, and then he goes down to Saigon, and as per typical fashion, he mentions the hecticness of Saigon, the jumble of massive people that are seemingly moving in chaos, compared relatively to Hanoi, which Hanoi compared to the West is chaos, but Hanoi compared to Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City is a very, very calm place. What else do I have to mention? One thing that I found refreshing is that he did mention different military things that went on with the U.S. in the country, but it was definitely more an observational piece, which, I mean, that's part of the seat of your pants thing. But you know, some of the things that I've read about about Vietnam, post-Vietnam War, it's all living in the past. And while this country's present is certainly affected by its past, it's not solely dictated by it. You know, he really kind of gets to know some people, and you know, acts of kindliness that people would offer him, or, you know, like tourist guides that were just trying to eke out a living. You know, he mentions this one story about how they went sort of away from the coast and deep into the jungle to find this the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and he was going to take a train back, but these people refused to tell him when the train was going to come, and he got really mad and was like, oh. But then he walked out, and some lady who knew Vietnamese, who was local to the area, so she kind of knew what the train schedule was too, just offered to tell him, and kind of went in and scolded the authorities, these kind of petty bureaucrats, for withholding this information to somebody that just wanted to get home. Yeah, so, yeah, I guess I mentioned he went into Laos, and I guess I should get to some of the overriding themes of this book. Oh, I guess the one other thing I was going to say about Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, you know, I talked about the jumble, the mass. He also went to a war museum there, and the war museum had, and this is really, I think, the difference between communism and democracy, is democracy has propaganda within it. You know, the United States spills out a bunch of propaganda all over the place, but we're also willing, to some degree, you know, to look at our follies, to really kind of examine what the atrocities that we committed, be they, oh, I'm going to forget it now, but they mention it in the book that there was this one, is it Don Trang? Maybe it's Don Trang, I don't know. But where American soldiers killed civilians. You know, you hear about that in the United States, but at their big military installation, and then this is kind of an example of the way communist propaganda works, is they had a huge museum to all the atrocities that Americans committed, and there were certainly many. The effects they had on the land, you know, there were more bombs bombed on Vietnam than there were in all of World War II. You know, Vietnam is a little tiny country, and World War II spanned the entire globe, but there were more bombs in Vietnam than in World War II. Basically just moonscaping the country. And he actually mentions this in the book, that you could tell the difference between like a sinkhole and a crater, and that were natural, like a natural sinkhole or crater, and one that was caused by a bomb from the Americans, by the fact that the ones that were caused by a bomb were almost perfectly circular. So there's that. That's an interesting tidbit. But in the museum, there were all these atrocities committed by Americans, but there was not one criticism of the way the North fought the war. You know, the North killed their own people, had forced enlistment, and I mean, that's kind of what you have to do to win a guerrilla war. So while it's terrible, it's somewhat justified, but there's absolutely no criticism or even just acknowledgement of what went the dirtier side of the North Vietnamese during the Vietnam War. I guess the last thing he does is he takes a trip out to the countryside to see some caves and temples, and he just kind of it's kind of a good way to end the book because it's not real epic. You would think that he would end the book in Saigon, but he ends this on this little side trip out to the end where he just kind of enjoys the countryside and meets some people, and some are sketchy. Communist Party, you know, it's sort of weird. The Communist Party and business are really sort of hard to differentiate at this point in Vietnam. So at the very end, he meets these people at this kind of restaurant bar that's real seedy out in the countryside. You know, it's just like a shack where they serve, you know, farmland, food, and drinks, and that sounds ideal, but it's actually very, very seedy kind of, just kind of back alley restaurant or back country restaurant. And, these businessmen and some communist people, like just trying to make their money too, kind of corrupt with one another. They're drunk and they want him to do karaoke, and he has to drive all the way back. But as kind of much of a downer in the book that this is kind of the experience somehow has some redeeming aspect to it. He's just kind of had a few drinks, drank with these, and then drives back to his hotel. That's the end of the book. No real sort of massive epic end, epic crescendo to the book, which I thought was good. It is a book that's kind of a seat of your pants kind of book, so it's appropriate. But anyway, yeah, I guess I won't really say too much other than that. It really does give a good kind of feel of Vietnam and the effect that the Vietnam War had on Vietnam without becoming solely about the Vietnam War. It just kind of talks to the people and the effects and all that stuff. I wish I had another like cultural thing to bring up, or some way to really send this out on a high note. But yeah, if you're interested in Vietnam and interested just in the country without too much formality or too much there is history, and it's correct history, and it's good history, but without too much didacticism of history, just kind of a free-flowing, easy-to-read, fun book, some history, some local people, easy read, nice read. You get to kind of laugh at some of his follies, with the language and stuff. I would recommend this book. So, Sparring with Charlie, Motorbiking Down the Ho Chi Minh Trail by Christopher Hunt. Say that again. Sparring with Charlie, Motorbiking Down the Ho Chi Minh Trail by Christopher Hunt. Alright, I'm hoping to have a few more of these out soon, so I'll see you guys. Alright, bye.